every evening, covering the tall glass buildings with a golden glow. In the middle of this world of power and money lived Mr. Arman, a man everyone admired from a distance. He was one of the most successful CEOs in the country, a millionaire who had built his empire through hard work, sharp decisions, and endless hours at his office. His name appeared in magazines, news channels spoke about him, and people quoted his speeches as lessons in business schools. To many, he seemed like the picture of a perfect life. He had everything a person could ever dream of: luxurious cars, private jets, mansions spread across different cities, and a lifestyle filled with grand parties and international travel. Yet behind all this glamour, there was a silence in Arman's life that no one could hear. Every evening, when the lights of his skyscraper office dimmed and his employees left, he sat alone by the giant window, staring at the city he ruled. The man who could sign billion-dollar deals with confidence felt strangely empty when it came to his personal life. He had no one waiting for him at home, no warm voice calling him to dinner, and no laughter echoing through the vast halls of his mansion. Arman often told himself that this was the price of success. He had given his youth to building his empire, working while others celebrated, and planning while others slept. He had traded the comfort of a family for the thrill of achievement. People around him admired him, but no one really knew him. He had employees, partners, and fans, but he had no one he could call his own. He had reached the peak of wealth, but he was standing alone on that peak. There were times when he tried to ignore the emptiness. He bought the latest cars, he flew to exotic islands, he wore the finest suits, and he dined in the most expensive restaurants. Yet every time, the happiness lasted only for a few hours. Once the moment passed, he returned to the same silence. A giant house with golden chandeliers meant nothing when there was no one to share a meal with. His success story was like a shiny cover of a book with blank pages inside. One night, after returning from a grand business gala where everyone praised him, he entered his mansion and dropped his keys on the glass table. The sound echoed loudly across the empty space. He looked around and sighed. The house was decorated with rare art, imported furniture, and expensive carpets, but it did not feel like a home. It was a museum of wealth, not a place of warmth. He poured himself a glass of water and sat on the sofa, staring at the silence that had become his closest companion. Arman often remembered his childhood. He was not born into wealth. He had grown up in a small neighborhood with parents who worked hard but had little to give. His father had passed away when he was young, and his mother raised him with strength and sacrifice. She could not give him expensive toys or clothes, but she gave him something far greater: love, encouragement, and hope. It was her words that pushed him to study hard, dream big, and never give up. When she passed away years later, he promised himself that he would build a life so powerful that the world would remember his name. And he did. But now, in the silence of his luxurious home, he wondered if somewhere along the way, he had lost the true meaning of life. Every morning, Arman wore his tailored suit, tied his silk tie, and stepped into the world where people bowed in respect and admired his brilliance. He walked into boardrooms filled with confidence, made deals that others could only dream of, and returned with victories. But when he removed his suit at night, he also removed the mask of a powerful man and became just a lonely soul. The man the world celebrated was, in truth, deeply incomplete. His assistant, Maria, had worked with him for almost a decade. She often noticed his loneliness but never dared to mention it. Once, while handing him a file, she gently said, "Sir, don't you ever get tired of being alone?" He gave her a half smile and replied, "Loneliness is a small price for greatness." But inside, he knew it was not small at all. It was heavy, heavier than all the success he carried. There were moments when he passed by families on the street. He would see a father holding his daughter's hand, laughing as they crossed the road, or a mother carrying her child while smiling at her husband. Those simple scenes touched something inside him. For a moment, he would slow down and watch. The happiness on their faces was natural, effortless, and free, something his millions could never buy. He would then return to his car, close the tinted window, and drive away, hiding his emotions behind the glass. Despite his emptiness, Armin never showed his true feelings in public. To the world, he was the strong, unstoppable leader. To his employees, he was a figure of discipline and inspiration. To his business rivals, he was a man to be feared. No one would ever imagine that when he returned home at night, he sometimes sat in his grand library with old photographs of his mother, whispering to her picture, "Am I really successful, or just pretending?" One afternoon, he received an invitation to a charity event. The organizers had requested him to visit an orphanage and support the children with donations. At first, he thought of sending a check through his assistant, but then, for reasons he could not explain, he decided to attend personally. Maybe it was boredom, maybe curiosity, or maybe a hidden desire to feel something real again. He ordered his staff to prepare dozens of expensive toys, gadgets, and packages to distribute. He wanted to make an impression, not just on the children, but on the media who would surely cover the event. In his mind, he imagined the children's faces lighting up when they received the toys. He thought he would feel a sense of satisfaction, perhaps even joy. What he did not know was that this visit, meant only as a public gesture, was about to change his life forever. The morning of the charity event arrived with the usual rush of business meetings, phone calls, and schedules, but for some reason, Armin felt slightly restless. He had attended hundreds of events before, but this one was different. It was not about investors or awards, it was about children. He told himself he was only going there as a part of his duty as a successful businessman, to show society that he cared. But somewhere inside, there was a quiet curiosity about what he might feel when he actually stood in front of children who had nothing yet managed to smile. His team had worked tirelessly for days to prepare for this visit. Expensive dolls, remote-controlled cars, shiny bicycles, and piles of gift boxes were loaded into trucks that followed his black limousine. Everything looked perfect, just as he liked it. When he arrived at the orphanage, the staff and media were already waiting. Cameras flashed as he stepped out of his car in his perfectly fitted suit, wearing the same confident smile that the world always saw. The children, excited and eager, rushed toward the courtyard where the toys were being arranged. Their little eyes sparkled as they whispered among themselves. For many of them, this was the first time they were seeing toys so grand and shiny. Some clapped, others giggled, and a few just stood silently in surprise. The air was filled with a kind of joy that made the place lively. Armin walked in with his usual pride, shaking hands with the orphanage director and greeting the guests. He spoke a few words about the importance of giving back to society and how children were the future. The crowd applauded politely. To him, it was just another formal speech, but to the children, it was a moment of expectation. They were waiting for the gifts. As the boxes were opened, the children rushed forward. Little boys grabbed toy cars and footballs, girls hugged dolls and teddy bears, and the courtyard was filled with laughter. Armin watched with a small smile, feeling satisfied that his plan was working. The cameras captured every moment, and the media noted his generosity. For once, he thought, he was giving happiness. But then, in the middle of the noise, his eyes fell on a little girl standing quietly in the corner. She was no more than 7 years old, wearing a simple faded dress and holding a small book tightly in her hands. Unlike the other children, she had not moved forward to pick a toy. She just stood still, watching everything with big thoughtful eyes. Curious, Armin walked toward her, holding a shiny new doll in his hand. "This is for you," he said with his practiced smile, bending slightly so he could meet her gaze. The cameras turned to capture the moment. Everyone expected the girl to beam with joy and grab the doll. But what happened next froze him in place. The little girl looked at the doll, then at him, and shook her head softly. Her voice was quiet but steady as she said, "Sir, I don't want toys. I want a dad." The words struck him like a lightning bolt. For a moment, he could not react. The crowd fell silent, the laughter of the other children faded into the background, and the cameras lowered slightly. Armin stood frozen, staring at the girl who had just spoken the simplest yet most powerful words he had ever heard. He tried to smile, thinking maybe she was joking or did not understand. "But this doll is very beautiful," he said gently, "don't you want to play with it?" The girl hugged her book tighter and shook her head again. "Toys break, sir. They don't stay forever. I just want someone who will never leave me. I want a dad." Her innocence cut through every layer of pride and power he carried. He felt his throat tighten. The man who could negotiate with the richest businessmen in the world suddenly found himself speechless before a child. Her words echoed inside him, louder than the applause, louder than the cameras, louder than anything he had heard in years. The staff of the orphanage quickly tried to distract the situation, guiding the other children to continue playing. One of them gently touched the girl's shoulder, asking her to take a toy. But she stayed still, her eyes locked on Armin, waiting for an answer he could not give. For the rest of the event, Armin moved like a machine. He handed out gifts, smiled for photos, and nodded politely at compliments. But his mind was stuck on the little girl's voice. Every time he tried to focus on the cheerful atmosphere, he heard her again, "Sir, I don't want toys. I want a dad." When the event ended, he sat in his car, staring blankly out of the window. His assistant spoke about the media coverage, praising how successful the event had been. But Armin barely heard her. For the first time in years, he was shaken in a way money could not fix. He had faced competitors, failures, and setbacks in business, but nothing had unsettled him like the words of that small child. On his way home, he kept remembering her eyes, innocent yet filled with a longing that pierced his heart. He thought about her simple request. She did not ask for wealth, for fancy dresses, or for expensive toys. All she wanted was something he had never considered giving: love, protection, and presence. Something he himself had missed after losing his father so young. That night, he walked into his mansion with the same silence waiting for him. But this time, the silence felt heavier. He placed his suit jacket on the chair and sat on the edge of his bed, his mind replaying the scene again and again. He saw the joy of the children, then the quiet face of the little girl, then heard her words like an echo inside his chest. He asked himself questions he had never asked before. What was the use of his millions if a child could not be comforted with them? What did success mean if it could not fill the emptiness of even one innocent heart? Why did the girl's wish feel like it was directed straight at him, as if she had spoken not just for herself but also for the loneliness he carried? For the first time in years, he felt restless in his own home. He walked through the grand halls, past the sparkling chandeliers, past the art on the walls, past the perfectly arranged furniture. None of it meant anything that night. The words of a 7-year-old child had shaken the very foundation of his life. Armin lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Somewhere in that orphanage, the little girl was probably asleep, holding her book instead of a toy, dreaming of a family she longed for. And here he was, in a mansion filled with everything except the one thing that mattered most: love. He closed his eyes, but the last thing he heard before drifting into uneasy sleep was her gentle voice, "Sir, I don't want toys. I want a dad." The next morning, Armin woke up earlier than usual. He had a long list of meetings scheduled, but his mind was still trapped in the memory of the little girl. Her small face, her quiet eyes, and her gentle but powerful words had shaken him deeply. He tried to push the thought aside by diving into his work, but every time he opened a file or listened to a business proposal, her voice whispered in the back of his mind, "Sir, I don't want toys. I want a dad." As the day went by, he realized he was not fully present in his meetings. His managers presented ideas, his partners discussed profits, but nothing held his attention. For the first time in years, money, numbers, and deals seemed meaningless. All he could think about was how a child could refuse toys that most children would dream of, and instead ask for something so simple yet so rare. That evening, instead of going home, he asked his driver to take him back to the orphanage. He did not inform the staff, nor did he want the media. He just wanted to see the place again, quietly, without the noise of cameras. When he arrived, the children were playing in the courtyard. Their laughter filled the air. Some were playing football, some were chasing each other, and a few were sitting under a tree, drawing on papers. Armin stood by the gate for a moment, watching. His heart felt lighter listening to their laughter, but his eyes searched for only one face: the little girl. After a few minutes, he saw her sitting alone near the steps, reading from her small, worn-out book. She looked calm, almost lost in another world, while all the other children were busy in games. He slowly walked toward her. This time, he was not the CEO making a grand appearance. He was just a man curious about a child who had touched something deep inside him. The girl noticed him and lifted her eyes. She did not smile in excitement like the others had done before. She just looked at him quietly, as if waiting to see why he was there. Armin sat down on the step beside her. "What are you reading?" he asked softly. "It's a storybook," she replied. "It's old, but I like it. The stories make me feel like I'm not alone." Her words once again touched him. He nodded and said, "Do you like reading more than playing with toys?" She hugged the book close and said, "Toys break and get lost. Stories stay in the heart. They make you feel like someone is with you, even when you're alone." Armin looked at her carefully. For a child so young, her words were far deeper than her age. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Alina," she answered, her voice soft but steady. "Alina," he repeated, almost as if testing the name on his lips. "Do you remember what you said to me yesterday?" She nodded. "Yes, sir. I told you I don't want toys. I want a dad." There was silence for a moment. The noise of the other children playing seemed distant. Armin felt his chest tighten. "Why did you say that?" he asked, his voice lower now. Alina looked down at her book and then back at him. "Because toys can make you happy for some time. But when night comes and everyone goes to sleep, I feel alone. I don't want to be alone. I want someone who will hold my hand, who will sit with me, who will tell me stories, and who won't leave me. I don't want to be alone anymore." Her words broke something inside Armin. He felt a pain he had not felt in years, a pain that came from realizing that this child's loneliness was not much different from his own. He too returned every night to an empty house, wishing for laughter and warmth that was not there. He too carried a heart that longed for love, though he never admitted it. For a long moment, he could not reply. He just sat beside her, listening to the sound of children playing, feeling the weight of her truth. Finally, he said quietly, "Alina, I don't know how to be a dad. I never had much of a father myself." She tilted her head and looked at him with innocent eyes. "Maybe you don't have to know. Maybe you just have to care." Those simple words went straight into his heart. The little girl had said something that no book, no business partner, no wise mentor had ever told him. Life was not about knowing everything, it was about caring, being present, and giving love. That evening, Armin stayed longer at the orphanage. He didn't bring gifts, he didn't give speeches, he didn't call photographers. He just sat with the children. He listened to their laughter, watched their games, and even joined them in a round of football. At first, the children giggled, surprised to see the rich businessman trying to kick a ball in his expensive shoes. But soon, their joy pulled him in. He laughed, really laughed, in a way he had not in years. Later, he helped serve dinner in the dining hall. The children lined up with their plates, and he handed out food. Alina sat at the end of the table, eating quietly. He sat next to her, sharing a simple meal of rice and curry. It was not a grand feast, but it felt more meaningful than all the luxury dinners he had ever attended. When it was time to leave, Alina looked at him and asked, "Will you come back again, sir?" He paused for a moment, then smiled gently. "Yes, Alina. I will come back." On the drive home, he felt different. The emptiness in his mansion was still there, but his heart carried something new, a warmth he had not felt in years. He thought of Alina's words again, "Maybe you don't have to know. Maybe you just have to care." From that day forward, Armin began visiting the orphanage regularly. Sometimes he would bring books, sometimes he would bring nothing at all, just himself. He spent time with the children, telling them stories, helping them with homework, or simply listening to their laughter. The staff noticed the change in him, but they said nothing. They saw that this once cold businessman was slowly learning the meaning of compassion. And every time he visited, Alina was there. She would greet him with a quiet smile, sometimes showing him the stories she read, sometimes just sitting with him in silence. Their bond grew stronger with every passing day. For Armin, she was no longer just a child from the orphanage. She had become a mirror of his own soul, reflecting the loneliness he carried and the love he longed to give. At night, when he returned to his mansion, he no longer felt only the silence. He felt Alina's words, her eyes, her innocence filling the empty spaces of his life. Slowly, he began to realize that his true success would not be measured in wealth, but in the love he could give and receive. For years, he had been known as the man who had everything. But only now was he beginning to learn that everything meant nothing without someone to share it with. And all it took was the voice of a little girl who dared to say, "I want a dad." Days turned into weeks, and weeks slowly turned into months. With every visit to the orphanage, Armin felt his heart becoming lighter, warmer, and more alive. The children had started waiting for him eagerly. The moment his car arrived near the gate, their voices filled the air with excitement. They would run toward him, calling his name, pulling at his hands, asking him to join their games. For a man who had once been feared in boardrooms and admired only for his wealth, this kind of love was something entirely new. It was pure, innocent, and unconditional. But out of all the children, it was Alina who touched him the most. She was not the loudest, nor the most playful, yet her quiet presence always found a way to reach his heart. Whenever he came, she would walk beside him, holding her little book, sometimes talking, sometimes just listening. With her, he did not feel like a powerful CEO. He felt like a human being, someone who belonged, someone who mattered not for his money but for his presence. Armin slowly began to change in ways even he did not fully notice. His assistant Maria saw it clearly. The man who once never left his office before midnight now asked to end meetings earlier so he could visit the children. The man who once valued only profits now talked about setting up scholarships and health programs for orphans. Even in his company, his employees noticed a difference. His tone was softer, his patience was greater, and his smile, something rare before, had started to appear more often. Still, despite the joy the orphanage gave him, Armin carried a quiet fear inside. He had lived his whole life in control of everything. In business, he knew exactly what to do. But when it came to love, care, and relationships, he felt like a beginner. Could he really become a father figure? Could he really give Alina the family she longed for? What if he failed? These questions often troubled him at night. One evening, after spending hours at the orphanage, he sat with Alina under the big tree in the courtyard. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Alina rested her head against his arm and asked softly, "Sir, do you ever feel lonely?" The question caught him by surprise. He looked down at her, wondering how much she truly understood. After a pause, he admitted, "Yes, Alina. I feel lonely very often." She lifted her head and looked into his eyes. "Then we are the same," she said simply. Her words pierced him again. For a long time, he had believed that loneliness was his private burden, a weight only he carried. But now he saw it reflected in a child's eyes. In that moment, he realized that perhaps fate had brought them together not by accident, but because they both needed each other. The thought of adopting her began to grow in his mind. At first, it was just a passing idea, but with every visit, the idea became stronger. He imagined what it would be like to bring her home, to fill the empty rooms of his mansion with laughter, to finally give her the family she wished for and, in return, heal his own emptiness. But the fear of failing held him back. One night, as he sat in his grand library, he found himself talking to his mother's old photograph again. "I don't know if I can do this, Mama," he whispered. "What if I'm not good enough? What if I can't give her the love she deserves?" In his heart, he felt as if his mother's gentle voice replied, "Love does not come from perfection, Armin. It comes from trying, from caring. That is enough." The next day, he spoke to Maria about his thoughts. She listened carefully, then smiled warmly. "Sir," she said, "I've worked with you for many years. I've seen you lead thousands of people. If you can lead them with strength, I'm sure you can love one child with your heart. Don't be afraid. Sometimes we only learn by doing." Her words gave him courage. He decided to take the first step. He spoke to the orphanage director about Alina, about her wish, and about his desire to adopt her. The director listened thoughtfully and said, "Mr. Armin, adoption is not just about giving a child a home. It is about giving her your time, your care, and your heart. Are you ready for that?" Armin nodded slowly. "Yes. I don't have all the answers yet. But I know I want to try. I want to give her what I never had, a family." The director agreed to begin the process but reminded him it would take time. There would be legal steps, visits, and approvals. During this time, Armin visited the orphanage even more often, making sure Alina felt his presence not as a guest, but as someone who cared deeply for her. Alina, though still young, sensed the change. One evening, when they were sitting together reading, she looked up and asked, "Sir, are you really going to be my dad?" Armin's heart skipped a beat. He hesitated for a moment, then gently held her little hand. "Alina, I don't know everything about being a dad. But I promise you one thing: I will always be here for you. I will never leave you alone." A soft smile spread across her face. She leaned against him and whispered, "That's all I wanted." In the following weeks, Armin's life continued to transform. He spent less time at luxurious parties and more time planning how to make his home warm and welcoming for a child. He ordered a room to be prepared for Alina, not with gold and expensive designs, but with simple things she liked: bookshelves, soft blankets, and colors that would make her smile. For the first time, his mansion was being touched with the feeling of a real home. But the journey was not without its struggles. Some of his business partners were surprised, even confused, by his decision. "Why would a man like you, who has everything, want to take on the responsibility of a child?" one asked. Armin simply replied, "Because everything means nothing without love." At night, doubts still visited him. What if Alina grew up and realized he was not enough? What if she wished for a different kind of father? But every time these fears troubled him, he remembered her words, "Maybe you don't have to know. Maybe you just have to care." And that reminder gave him strength. Slowly, the adoption process moved forward. Each step made him both nervous and hopeful. Alina, too, waited eagerly, though she never asked too many questions. She trusted him, and that trust itself became his biggest motivation. One evening, as he prepared to leave the orphanage, Alina ran up to him and held his hand tightly. "Sir," she said, "thank you for not forgetting me." He knelt down, looking into her innocent eyes. "Alina, I could never forget you. You've changed my life in ways you don't even know." As he drove home that night, the silence in his mansion no longer felt as heavy as before. For the first time, he saw hope shining through the emptiness. He realized that true change does not come from wealth, fame, or power. It comes from love, from the courage to open your heart, and from the willingness to share your life with someone else. And deep inside, he knew he was ready to be a father, not by perfection, but by love. The day of approval finally came after weeks of paperwork, visits, and careful checks. The orphanage director called Armin and informed him that everything had been completed. He was now officially allowed to adopt Alina. Hearing those words made his heart race in a way that no business deal had ever done. For years, he had lived with numbers and contracts, but this moment was different. It was not about profit, it was about love, responsibility, and a new beginning. That evening, when Armin arrived at the orphanage, Alina was sitting on the steps as usual, waiting with her small book in hand. She looked up and smiled as soon as she saw him. He walked toward her, his heart beating fast. Kneeling down to her level, he gently said, "Alina, today is a special day. From now on, you are no longer alone. You are coming home with me. I am your dad." For a moment, Alina's eyes widened in disbelief. Then her face lit up with the purest joy, and she threw her little arms around his neck. "Really?" she whispered, almost afraid it might not be true. "Really," Armin replied, holding her close. His eyes grew moist, and he felt a warmth inside that he had never felt before. For the first time in years, his embrace was not empty. It carried meaning. The children of the orphanage gathered around, clapping and cheering. The staff, too, smiled warmly. They had seen many children leave with families, but this moment felt special. They knew how much Alina had longed for a father, and they knew how much Armin had changed because of her. Later that night, Armin brought Alina to his mansion. The huge doors opened, and she stepped inside slowly, her eyes wide with wonder. The grand chandeliers, the tall ceilings, the polished floors, all of it seemed like a dream to her. But Armin knelt beside her and said, "Alina, this house may be big, but it has been empty. From today, it is not just a house, it is our home." He guided her to her new room. Unlike the other rooms filled with luxury, this one was designed with her in mind. Soft curtains in her favorite color, a small desk for her books, a cozy bed with toys and blankets, everything was arranged to make her feel safe and loved. Alina ran to the bookshelf and touched the new storybooks that were waiting for her. Her face glowed with happiness. "This is my room?" she asked with excitement. "Yes," Armin said, smiling. "This is your room. This is your home." That night, as Alina lay in her new bed, she asked softly, "Will you tell me a story, Dad?" The word Dad touched him like music. It was the first time someone had called him that. He sat beside her, picked a storybook, and began reading. His voice was steady, but inside, he was overwhelmed. To the world, he had been called many things: sir, boss, CEO, even millionaire, but now, for the first time, he was called something that mattered most: Dad. The days that followed brought more changes to Armin's life. His mornings no longer started with just meetings and phone calls. They began with Alina's laughter, her little footsteps running across the hall, her cheerful voice calling for breakfast. The mansion that once echoed with silence now echoed with life. At first, Armin felt awkward with simple fatherly duties. He was used to making business strategies, not tying shoelaces or helping with homework. But slowly, he learned. He sat with her as she studied, guided her when she struggled, and celebrated her small victories. He cooked simple meals with her, sometimes burning the food, and they both laughed about it. He drove her to school, listened to her endless stories, and discovered the beauty of ordinary moments he had missed for so long. The people around him noticed the change too. His employees saw a softer side of him. The stern man who once spoke only of numbers now often shared stories of Alina. During meetings, he sometimes smiled absent-mindedly, thinking about something she had said. His assistant Maria often teased him, saying, "Sir, you're a better father than you ever believed you could be." Armin also learned patience. Children, he realized, did not follow rules like business deals. Sometimes Alina cried for no reason, sometimes she demanded attention when he was busy, and sometimes she made mistakes. But instead of anger, he felt compassion. He understood that fatherhood was not about perfection but about presence. One evening, as they sat in the garden watching the stars, Alina asked, "Dad, are you happy?" He looked at her, smiling gently. "Yes, Alina. I am happier than I have ever been." She leaned against his arm and whispered, "Me too." That simple moment reminded him of how far he had come. A man who once lived surrounded by riches but empty in spirit now sat with a little girl who had filled his world with meaning. Months passed, and their bond grew stronger. Alina brought out the child hidden inside Armin. He laughed more, smiled more, and even joined her in playful activities he never imagined himself doing. They painted together, baked together, and even built a small treehouse in the garden. Each activity, no matter how small, became a memory carved into his heart. But it was not just Armin who changed, Alina did too. The shy, quiet girl who once sat alone with her book began to open up. She smiled more, laughed louder, and played freely. She no longer looked at toys with longing, because she now had something greater. She had a father who loved her. One Sunday morning, Armin was sitting in the living room reading the newspaper when Alina came running with a handmade card. On the front, in colorful letters, it said, "World's Best Dad." Inside, she had drawn a picture of herself holding his hand. Underneath it, she had written in shaky handwriting, "Thank you for choosing me." Armin's eyes filled with tears as he hugged her tightly. "No, Alina," he whispered. "Thank you for choosing me." That card remained on his desk forever, more valuable than any award or trophy he had ever received. Over time, the world also noticed the transformation. The media, once focused on his wealth and power, now spoke about his kindness and his work for children. Inspired by his journey, he started a foundation for orphans, making sure more children found families and education. He wanted every child to feel the love that Alina had once wished for. But for him, the biggest achievement was not in newspapers or headlines. It was in the everyday moments, hearing Alina call him Dad, watching her fall asleep peacefully, sharing meals together, and knowing that neither of them was alone anymore. One evening, as they sat by the fireplace, Alina looked at him thoughtfully. "Dad," she said, "remember the day I told you I didn't want toys, I wanted a dad?" He nodded, smiling warmly. "I remember, Alina. That day changed everything." She placed her small hand over his. "That was the best wish I ever made. Because it came true." Armin's heart swelled with emotion. He realized then that true wealth was not in the things he owned but in the love he had found. His life had been transformed not by money, but by a little girl's innocent wish. And so, the man once known only as a millionaire CEO was now known for something greater, not his wealth, not his empire, but for being a father. His story became a reminder to everyone that the most precious gifts in life cannot be bought with money. They are found in love, in family, and in the simple words of a child who dared to say, "Sir, I don't want toys. I want a dad."